"Father, I'm cold and hungry." Finn's weak whisper echoed in the damp darkness of the tower. Kyle felt his heart freeze. His grandsons, Leor and Finn, shivered with fever and malnutrition. Driven from everything they knew, they found a treacherous refuge in the ruins of the old forgotten Lord's Tower. The wind howled through the cracks, seeming to mock their misery. While Finn's incessant cough tore through the silence, Kyle, with his calloused hands, fumbled along the cold stone wall, searching for any glimmer of hope, any sign of life or warmth, when his fingers brushed against something that shouldn't have been there. And what he discovered changed the course of his destiny forever. The stone Kyle touched yielded slightly, a muffled grinding sound echoing in the oppressive silence. It wasn't a loose rock, but a lever, carefully disguised within the irregular texture of the wall. With a mix of surprise and a pang of fear, Kyle pushed harder. A slow, heavy creak filled the air, and a section of the stone wall, previously indistinguishable, began to move inward, revealing a dark, narrow crevice. The air that escaped from the passage was damp and musty, carrying the scent of centuries of oblivion. Leor, who was nestled close to Kyle, raised his head, his eyes wide with curiosity despite his weariness. "What is it, father?" he murmured, his voice hoarse. Finn, oblivious, continued to cough weakly, his small chest rising and falling with difficulty. Kyle felt a shiver run down his spine. That place, already so desolate, now revealed a secret that could be both a salvation and a trap. But the image of Finn's pale face, the fever burning on his small cheeks, was a fire that consumed any hesitation. He had to try. He had to find a solution. Carefully, Kyle lit their last candle, its flickering flame barely conquering the darkness. The light revealed a tight passage, with uneven steps descending into the unknown. "Stay here, my boys. Father will take a look," he whispered, his voice trying to sound firmer than his heart felt. Leor nodded, clinging to his sick brother. Kyle squeezed through the opening, the dampness seeping into his worn clothes, the smell of earth and ancient stone enveloping him. The passage was short, opening into a small circular chamber. In the center lay what appeared to be a collapsed fireplace, its remnants scattered across the dusty floor. There were no glittering treasures, no gold or jewels to alleviate their immediate misery. Disappointment threatened to crush him, but Kyle, with a heavy sigh, began to search through the rubble, driven by stubborn persistence. If there was a secret passage, perhaps there was more. His fingers found something stiff and flat beneath a pile of stones and soot. Carefully he pulled it out. It was a piece of ancient parchment, yellowed by time, rolled up and tied with a dried leather thong. Kyle unrolled it with trembling hands, the candlelight dancing across its surface. It wasn't a will nor a list of possessions, but a map, a rudimentary map, drawn with faded ink, showing a tortuous route through mountains and forests, culminating in a valley with a symbol of a bubbling spring and the inscription, almost illegible, "Waters of Life, Land of Abundance." Kyle's heart leapt. A legendary valley, known for its healing waters and fertile lands, a place thought to exist only in fairy tales. Hope, long dormant, ignited in his chest like the candle flame in his hands. It was a long and dangerous journey, he knew, but the promise of healing for Finn, of a new beginning for Leor and himself, was a beacon in the darkness of his despair. He looked at the map, then at the darkness of the passage that led him back to his grandsons. The solution he had promised was there, fragile as the parchment, but powerful as the love he felt. He would return to them with the promise of a tomorrow. Kyle, his heart pounding in his chest, carefully rolled up the parchment as if it were the most precious of treasures. The promise of a tomorrow, which before seemed a distant echo in the darkness, now gained contours, however faint. He turned, the candle flickering in his hand, and began to ascend the damp steps, feeling the weight of hope and responsibility on his tired shoulders. Each step was an effort, but the image of Finn, fragile and helpless, propelled him forward. Emerging from the secret passage, Kyle found Lior exactly where he had left him, embracing his brother. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of his grandfather, a mix of relief and curiosity on his pale face. Finn, in a restless sleep, coughed again, a sound that pierced the silence in Kyle's heart. The old man knelt, the candlelight illuminating the map in his hands. "Father, what did you find?" Lior asked, his voice almost a whisper as Kyle approached. Kyle extended the parchment, unfolding it with a slow, solemn gesture. "It's not gold, my son," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion, "but something far more valuable. It's a map to a place said to have waters that heal and lands that nourish, a legendary valley, Lior, where we can find a new home and, more importantly, a cure for our little Finn." Leah's eyes fixed on the faded drawing, tracing the lines and symbols with childlike fascination, yet also with an understanding beyond his young age. A spark of hope, long extinguished by hunger and cold, ignited in his gaze. He looked at Kyle, then at his sick brother, and a faint but genuine smile bloomed on his cracked lips. "A valley of healing," he repeated, the idea seeming almost a miracle. Kyle nodded, his own hope growing as he saw the spark in his grandson's eyes. "Yes, my dear, it will be a difficult journey, full of challenges, but we have to go. We have to try. We cannot stay here and watch Finn waste away." He touched Finn's feverish forehead with his rough palm, feeling the relentless heat. The boy moaned softly, turning on the thin blanket. The decision was monumental. Kyle felt fear tighten his chest, the fear of the unknown, the fear of failing, the fear of not being strong enough to protect his grandsons. But the alternative, to remain in the tower, was even more terrifying. His love for Lior and Finn was an unwavering force, a shield against the despair that threatened to engulf him. He remembered the promise he had made, not only to them, but to himself, that he would find a solution. And there it was, fragile as the parchment, yet real. "Let's get ready, Lior," Kyle said, his voice gaining new firmness. "We'll need everything we can carry. Water, what's left of our dry bread, and the blankets. We can't delay." He watched Lior, who was already moving with renewed energy, beginning to gather their few belongings. The sight of his grandson, so young and already so resilient, filled Kyle with a painful pride. Night advanced, and the decision to leave before dawn seemed the most sensible. Kyle knew that every hour was precious for Finn. He looked at the map again, studying the mountains and rivers, feeling the vastness of the journey that awaited them. There was no guarantee of success, only the stubborn faith of a grandfather who refused to give up. With a deep sigh, he stood, determination etched on his time-worn face. The tower, once a refuge, was now merely a starting point for the greatest adventure of their lives, a race against time and against illness, driven by the purest love. Kyle and Lior prepared in silence in the damp tower. Kyle rolled up the map, keeping it close to his chest, like a talisman of hope. His tired eyes swept over the small refuge. Now a starting point. Lior, serious, tied the few blankets into an improvised bundle. The dry bread and the almost empty canteen were their only supplies. Kyle approached Finn, who was sleeping restlessly, his breath wheezing. He touched the boy's forehead, feeling the persistent heat of the fever. Kyle's heart tightened. Finn's life depended on every minute. "We're ready, father," Lior whispered, his voice choked by the pre-dawn cold. Kyle nodded, a lump in his throat. He picked Finn up in his arms, the small, fragile body. The boy curled against his grandfather's chest, a weak moan escaping. Kyle felt the heat of the fever, the urgency of the mission intensifying. With Lior by his side, holding his hand, they moved to the tower's opening. The darkness outside was deep, but the first signs of a pale grey were appearing. The icy wind greeted them, whipping their faces. Leaving the tower was a challenge. Slippery stones and creeping vegetation made each step uncertain. Kyle, with Finn in his arms, felt the weight of his weariness. Lior, despite his fear, walked bravely, his small feet seeking purchase. He looked at his grandfather, seeking reassurance. And Kyle always offered him a nod. With each cough from Finn, the grandfather held his grandson closer, murmuring comfort. Dawn painted the sky, revealing the desolate landscape. The forest, dense and dark, awaited the first of many obstacles. They entered the woods. The damp, heavy air enveloped them. Twisted trees formed a labyrinth of shadows and roots, making the walk arduous. Kyle felt pain in his shoulders and back, but the image of Finn, pale and feverish, was a constant reminder of what was at stake. Lior stumbled but got up, determination on his face. With each cough from Finn, Kyle's heart tightened and he murmured prayers. The sun filtered through the canopy, but the beauty did not lessen their hunger or thirst. Kyle stopped under a tree, laying Finn on the ground, on a blanket. The boy was pale, his lips cracked, his breathing heavy. Lior knelt beside his brother, stroking his sweaty hair. "Will he be okay, father?" Lior asked, his eyes full of worry. Kyle knelt, pulling Lior into an embrace. "He will, my son. We have to have faith and be strong for him." He offered water to Finn, who drank with difficulty. Lior took a sip. Kyle merely moistened his lips. The dry bread was shared. The path ahead seemed endless, but Kyle felt he carried the family's future. His love for his grandsons was the driving force, an inextinguishable flame. He knew they would face dangers, but the vision of Finn recovered, playing with Lior in a safe place, was the beacon that guided his spirit. With renewed determination, Kyle picked Finn back up in his arms and, with Lior by his side, moved forward, entering deeper into the forest. Towards the unknown, with hope alight. The true wealth lay in the promise of a tomorrow. The forest closed in around them, a labyrinth where sunlight barely dared to penetrate. Kyle felt Finn's weight in his arms, the boy's feverish heat burning through his clothes. Each step was a battle against treacherous roots and low-hanging branches. Lior, with the improvised bundle on his back, followed closely, his eyes attentive to the ground. The silence of the woods was broken only by the rustling of leaves beneath their feet and Finn's increasingly weak cough. Kyle stopped, leaning against a thick trunk to catch his breath. His muscles screamed with pain, and hunger gnawed at his stomach. He looked at the map, unfolding it carefully. The faded lines seemed to mock his slowness. The legendary valley was still so distant, a faint promise amidst the brutal reality. Lior approached, his face dirty and tired, but his eyes held a spark of determination. "Are we on the right path, father?" he asked, his voice low. Kyle nodded, forcing a reassuring smile. "Yes, my son, the map is clear. We just need to keep going." He knew he wasn't just answering Lior, but himself. Doubt was a silent poison. Finn moaned, and Kyle held him tighter, feeling his irregular breathing. With each breath, Kyle's fear grew, but so did his resolve. He would not fail them. They continued their journey. The hours dragged on, each one heavier than the last. The sun, when it managed to penetrate the tree canopy, indicated that midday had passed. Thirst was almost unbearable. Kyle offered the last sip of water to Finn, who could barely swallow. Lior looked at the empty canteen with silent sadness, but did not complain. His resilience was a balm to Kyle. The old man felt his throat dry and his tongue rough, but his grandsons were always the priority. In a small clearing, Kyle decided they needed a brief rest. He carefully laid Finn on the blanket, watching the boy's chest rise and fall with difficulty. Lior sat beside him, stroking his brother's cold little hand. "Father, he's very hot," Laya murmured, his eyes welling up. Kyle touched Finn's forehead and felt the intense heat. Despair threatened to engulf him. He felt helpless, unable to alleviate his grandson's suffering. But then he remembered the promise of the valley, of the healing waters. It was not time to falter. He took Lior in his arms, hugging him tightly. "We will find those waters, Lior. I promise. Finn will be all right." Kyle's voice was choked, but it carried the strength of unwavering love. He knew that faith was all they had left. With a sigh, Kyle stood, the pain in his knees and back a constant reminder of his age. He picked Finn up again, adjusting the boy in his arms. With each step, he imagined the valley's crystal-clear waters, the freshness of the fertile land, Finn's laughter as he played. This image was his fuel, his beacon. Laya, seeing the renewed determination on his grandfather's face, also rose, ready to follow. The forest was still dense and menacing, but hope, fragile as it was, propelled them forward, one step at a time, towards the unknown, but with a clear purpose. Finn's life depended on it. The forest closed in around them, a labyrinth where sunlight barely dared to penetrate. Kyle felt Finn's weight in his arms, the boy's feverish heat burning through his clothes. Each step was a battle against treacherous roots and low-hanging branches. Lior, with the improvised bundle on his back, followed closely, his eyes attentive to the ground. The silence of the woods was broken only by the rustling of leaves beneath their feet and Finn's increasingly weak cough. The forest deepened, its ancient trees forming a dense canopy that barely allowed light to pass. Kyle felt Finn's weight, which seemed to grow heavier in his arms with each passing moment, the fever transforming his small body into a hot, inert burden. With every step, Kyle's knees protested, and the pain in his back was a constant companion. Lior, with his almost empty bundle, followed his grandfather, his eyes fixed on the ground, searching for the least treacherous path among the exposed roots and mossy stones. Finn's cough, once a weak sound, was now an occasional gasp, more worrying than a cry. Kyle stopped, panting, and leaned against an ancient oak, its rough bark scratching his face. He looked at the map again, the faded lines seeming to writhe in his vision, blurred by exhaustion. The forest seemed endless, and the promise of the valley, once a beacon, now felt like a distant, almost cruel dream. Lior approached, his small hand touching his grandfather's arm. "Father, are we lost?" The boy's voice was a thread of hope. Kyle squeezed his eyes shut, pushing away the shadow of doubt. "No, my son, never lost as long as we have each other." He forced a smile, trying to instill a confidence he barely felt. "The map indicates we should find a small stream. If we find it, we'll be on the right path." But the truth was, the forest seemed to swallow any trace of a path. They continued to walk, the silence of the woods only accentuating the hopelessness. Kyle's throat was dry, and thirst was an agony. He looked at Finn, whose lips were dry and cracked. There was no more water. The last drop had been given to the boy hours ago. Lior, noticing his grandfather's gaze, touched his own neck, indicating his own thirst, but said nothing. His silent understanding was both a relief and a burden to Kyle. Suddenly, Kyle heard a sound, a distant murmur, almost inaudible beneath the rustling of leaves. He stopped, raising his head, his senses sharpened by urgency. "Did you hear that, Laya?" he whispered. Laya nodded, his eyes wide. The sound grew clearer, a soft, unmistakable gurgle. Water. With a new burst of energy, Kyle quickened his pace, his aching body ignored by the promise of salvation. Lior followed closely, renewed hope on his face. In a few minutes, they emerged into a small clearing where a narrow, crystal-clear stream meandered among the stones. The sight was a balm to their eyes and souls. Kyle knelt by the banks, carefully laying Finn down. With trembling hands, he scooped up the fresh water and brought it to his grandson's lips. Finn drank eagerly, a groan of relief escaping his lips. Kyle felt a wave of gratitude so intense that his eyes welled up. Lior also knelt, cupping his hands to drink the water, life returning to his eyes. Kyle drank too, feeling the cold water descend his dry throat, washing away the dust and weariness. That stream was not just water, it was a sign, a confirmation that they were not alone, that hope was real. He looked at the map again, and this time the lines seemed clearer, the path less daunting. The stream was a landmark, indicating they were making progress. He embraced Lior, who nestled against him, exhausted but visibly more animated. "We're on the right path, my son," Kyle repeated, this time with a conviction that came from the depths of his soul. "This stream will guide us. Finn will be all right." Kyle's voice was firm, the weariness still present, but hopelessness had been washed away by the fresh water. Kyle, with their canteens refilled and their spirits lighter, knew the journey was far from over. But the discovery of the stream was a powerful reminder that perseverance was worthwhile, that even in the darkest moments, nature could offer a helping hand. He picked Finn up again, feeling the heat of the fever, but also a slight improvement in the boy's breathing. With Lior by his side, they stood, ready to face whatever came, driven by faith and the unwavering love that bound them. The legendary valley seemed less distant now. They followed the stream, which meandered gently among the trees, offering a clearer and less treacherous path than the dense woods. For a time, Kyle's hope rekindled. Lior walked with a light step, his curious eyes watching the fish in the shallow waters. Finn, nestled in his grandfather's arms, seemed to breathe with ease, and Kyle felt momentary relief, a glimpse of the miracle he expected in the valley. The sun, filtered through the canopy, created patches of light on the ground, and the air felt fresher. But as they advanced, the landscape began to change. The stream, once clear and inviting, became darker and muddier. The trees grew denser, their canopies intertwining so much that sunlight barely reached the ground. The air grew heavy, damp, laden with a strange smell of wet earth and something stagnant and ancient. Kyle felt a shiver run down his spine, a premonition that made him press Finn closer to his chest. The feeling of being on the right path began to fade, replaced by growing apprehension. He stopped, unfolding the map with trembling hands. The faded lines, which once seemed to guide, now appeared confusing, almost mocking. The stream, which should have led them to a fertile valley, was leading them into a dark, silent swamp. The water, once crystal clear, was now murky and greenish. Ahead, the stream disappeared into a vast expanse of mud and tall reeds, a dark green labyrinth exuding a foul, heavy odor. There was no path, only the promise of getting bogged down and danger. Lior approached, his eyes wide with fear. "Father, what is this?" he whispered, pointing to the darkness of the swamp. Finn's cough, which had subsided, returned with force. Kyle felt his heart tighten. The swamp was an insurmountable barrier, a silent monster. The hope the stream had ignited now drowned in the mud and hopelessness. He looked at the map again, searching for any indication, but there was nothing to suggest such an obstacle. It was as if the legendary valley was hidden by a final, cruel test. Despair threatened to overwhelm him, a coldness creeping up his spine. How could he cross that treacherous swamp with Finn so weak, each breath an agonizing effort? How could he protect Lior from those dark, unknown waters which seemed to hide invisible dangers? The promise he had made to his grandsons of a valley of healing and abundance now seemed a cruel mirage, a distant echo of a hope dissolving in the mud. Kyle felt the weight of failure, physical and emotional exhaustion crushing him. His eyes welled up, but he blinked hard, refusing to cry. He couldn't afford to falter, not with his grandsons' lives in his hands. He looked at Lior, who watched him with fear and trust. Kyle pressed Finn against his chest, feeling the feverish heat. "We won't stop, my son," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "This isn't the end, it's just a detour. We'll find another way. There's always another way." The faith in his voice was a balm to Lear, who nodded, gripping his hand. Kyle knew the journey would be longer and harder than he had imagined, but the image of a recovered Finn was a fire burning in his soul. He turned, beginning to search for an alternative path, determined not to give up, no matter the obstacle. His love for his grandsons was his compass, his true guide. Kyle turned, searching for an alternative path, determined not to give up. His love for his grandsons was his true compass. The swamp stretched ahead, murky, mocking Kyle's determination. He pressed Finn against his chest, feeling the boy's shallow breaths. Lior, his small hand in Kyle's, looked up, his face a mix of fear and trust. Kyle knew he couldn't waver. He turned to the dense forest bordering the swamp, searching for a gap, a way to bypass the barrier. Each step was an effort. The trees were ancient and intertwined, low-hanging branches and exposed roots creating an impenetrable web. Kyle, his vision blurred, pushed aside the undergrowth, feeling scratches. Lior followed closely, his eyes alert, dodging obstacles. Finn's cough returned, stronger and more painful, tearing at Kyle's heart. He stopped, nestling his grandson closer, murmuring comfort. "Hold on, my little one. We're almost there," he whispered, though there seemed more distant. Finn's fever rose, and Kyle felt cold sweat trickle down. The forest conspired against them. Sunlight vanished, plunging them into damp, cold gloom. The air was heavy. An oppressive silence hung. Kyle felt despair gnaw at his determination. The promise seemed harder with each obstacle. Lior, sensing his grandfather's tension, squeezed his hand. "Father, are you tired?" he asked, his childlike voice laden with concern. Kyle looked at his grandson, and Lior's expression, innocence and resilience, rekindled an ember in his chest. He couldn't give up. Not for Lior, not for Finn. "No, my son, just thinking," Kyle replied, forcing a smile. "We'll find the best way." Lior's faith depended on his strength. They continued to advance, Kyle pushing his exhausted body forward. The vegetation was dense. The map offered little help. He navigated by faith, intuition, and love. Suddenly, Lior tugged Kyle's hand. "Father, look!" he exclaimed, pointing to something on the ground. Kyle bent down with difficulty and saw a small pile of stones, covered in moss, but clearly stacked by human hands. It wasn't a trail, but a cairn, a sign that someone had passed that way before. A faint but real hope ignited in his heart. "It's a cairn, Lior," Kyle said, his voice choked. "Someone marked this path. Perhaps it's an old shortcut." He felt relief, a thread of light in the darkness. The discovery was small, but its meaning was immense. They weren't lost. There was a way. With renewed energy, Kyle followed the stones. The path was not easy, but discernible, a promise. With each cairn, hope grew. Kyle knew the journey would be long, but the forgotten trail was a reminder. Perseverance opened doors. He looked at Finn, who now slept more calmly, and at Lior, who walked with a new sparkle in his eyes. Love illuminated the way. Kyle, with hope kindled like a fragile flame, followed the trail of stacked stones. With each cairn, a small miracle revealed itself, confirming they were not alone, that the forest, despite its vastness, held a secret passage. The path, though narrow and moss-covered, was discernible, winding among younger, less dense trees than the woods they had traversed. The air gradually felt less damp and heavy, and the foul smell of the swamp began to diminish, replaced by the fresh aroma of earth and pine. Kyle felt the pain in his knees and shoulders, but with each step, the promise of a shortcut propelled him forward. He pressed Finn against his chest, feeling the persistent heat of the fever, but also a slight improvement in the boy's breathing, who now slept a more peaceful sleep. Liar, his eyes fixed on the cairns, walked with renewed energy, his small, agile feet dodging roots and stones. He looked at his grandfather with each new stone, a shy smile appearing on his dirty lips. "We're going to the right place, father," he whispered, his voice full of confidence. Kyle nodded, a lump in his throat. Lear's unwavering faith was a balm to his tired soul. "Yes, my son, this path was made for us." He knew the journey would be long, but the discovery of that forgotten trail was a powerful reminder that perseverance opened doors, even the oldest and most hidden ones. As they advanced, the terrain began to rise gently. The forest opened up a little, allowing more sunlight to filter through the canopy, creating a play of shadows and light on the forest floor. The cairns continued to appear, but less frequently, as if the path's builder had grown weary or believed the traveler would already be safe. Kyle, however, felt a new apprehension. The trail, once clear, now became fainter, the stones more spaced out, almost swallowed by the undergrowth. The rising terrain was a challenge for his tired legs, and Finn's heart, though calmer, still beat with the urgency of the fever. Suddenly, the path opened into a small rocky clearing at the top of a low hill. The view was breathtaking, revealing the vastness of the forest stretching to the horizon. But Kyle's joy was short-lived. In the center of the clearing, the cairns stopped abruptly. Ahead, the path split into two distinct directions. One trail, wider and visibly more used, descended sharply into an even denser part of the forest, where the trees seemed to close in a dark embrace. The other, almost imperceptible, climbed a rocky, steep and treacherous slope, leading to a distant, hazy plateau. Kyle stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. He unfolded the map, but the faded lines offered no clue for that fork in the path. The legendary valley was not marked with such detail. It was a decision he would have to make alone, without the help of ancient guides or legends. Doubt, a silent poison, began to gnaw at his mind. Which path would lead to salvation? Which would lead him to an even greater abyss of despair? He looked at Finn, who was now coughing again, a weak sound, but one that echoed like thunder in the clearing silence. Time was a luxury they did not have. Lior, sensing his grandfather's hesitation, tugged his hand. "Father, which way is right?" he asked, his voice laden with an innocence that pierced Kyle's heart. The old man looked into Lior's eyes, which reflected fear, but also an unwavering trust in his grandfather. Kyle took a deep breath, closing his eyes for an instant. He remembered the promise he had made, the faith that propelled him. The answer was not on the map, but in his heart. He could not choose the easier path, the one that descended into darkness. Hope always resided in the ascent, in the search for something greater. With renewed determination, Kyle pressed Finn against his chest and looked at Lior. "The way up, my son," he said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty. "The valley is in the heights, where the healing waters spring from the mountains. We will climb." He knew it would be harder, more exhausting, but the image of a recovered Finn, playing under the sun, was the beacon that guided him. With a sigh of courage, Kyle began to climb the rocky slope, one step at a time, with Lior by his side, blindly trusting the love that bound them. The rocky slope was a relentless challenge. Each of Kyle's steps was a battle against gravity and the exhaustion that gnawed at his bones. Loose stones rolled beneath his worn boots, threatening his already precarious stability. He pressed Finn against his chest, the boy's feverish heat, a constant reminder of the urgency of his mission. His grandson's body seemed heavier with each meter climbed, and the weak cough that escaped Finn's dry lips pierced Kyle's heart like 1,000 needles. Lior, with the resilience of a small plant sprouting from rock, followed his grandfather closely. His attentive eyes sought the best footholds for Kale, and his small hand, now and then, touched the old man's arm, a silent gesture of support worth more than 1,000 words. Kale felt the searing pain in his knees and the burning in his thigh muscles, but the image of the legendary valley, with its healing waters and fertile lands, was a balm to his soul and fuel for his body. He looked back for an instant, seeing the dense, dark forest stretching below, a green vastness that seemed to swallow them. The choice to climb to seek the heights weighed on his mind, but he refused to doubt. The thin air of the altitude began to tighten Kale's chest, making each breath an effort. He stopped on a small ledge, panting, and leaned against the cold rock. Finn, in his arms, let out a weak moan, and Kale felt sweat trickle down the boy's forehead. With trembling hands, he took out the canteen, offering a few drops of water to Finn's lips. The boy drank with difficulty, and Kale felt a pang in his heart. "Hold on, my little one," he whispered, his voice hoarse, kissing his grandson's warm forehead. Lior nestled beside his grandfather, his small hand squeezing Kale's. "Father, what's up there?" he asked, his voice a hopeful whisper. Kale looked at the distant, hazy plateau, which seemed to hover above them like an uncertain promise. "The valley, my son. The valley awaits us. The waters that will heal Finn." The conviction in his voice was an act of faith, an anchor for himself and for Lior. He knew the journey was a test of his own strength and the depth of his love. They continued to climb, the sun now setting on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. Shadows lengthened, and the night's chill began to settle in. Kale felt his body tremble, not just from weariness, but from a subtle fear that tried to infiltrate his mind. What if he was wrong? What if this path led to nothing but more despair? But he shook his head, pushing away the dark thoughts. Lior's faith, his love for Finn, were his shields. Suddenly, Kale felt a change in the air. A different smell, not of earth and pine, but of something cleaner, fresher, almost mineral. He raised his head, his tired eyes sweeping the plateau above. The mist seemed to dissipate slightly, revealing sharper contours. With a final effort, he propelled his body upward, dragging himself to the edge of the plateau. Lior followed him, his small feet finding purchase where Kale barely could. When they finally reached the top, the view that opened before them was breathtaking. It wasn't the fertile valley Kale had imagined, but a vast expanse of strangely shaped rocks, sculpted by wind and time. The plateau was a stone desert, but the air was incredibly pure and the silence deep and majestic. In the center of that desolate landscape, Kale noticed something. A deep crevice in the rock, from which a faint breeze seemed to emanate, and an almost imperceptible sound, like a distant murmur. His eyes widened. It was a cave, a dark portal to the unknown, and somehow Kale felt that the answer lay there, hidden in the depths of that ancient rock. The cave, a dark crevice in the rock, opened ahead, promising both mystery and danger. Kale felt a chill, not just from the fresh air emanating from its depths, but from the uncertainty that the darkness represented. He pressed Finn against his chest, the small, feverish body, a constant reminder that there was no time for hesitation. Lior, his eyes wide, gripped Kale's hand tightly, his small palm sweaty. "Father, it's very dark in there," the boy whispered, his voice trembling, almost inaudible. Kale knelt, adjusting Finn in his arms, and looked at Lior, forcing a reassuring smile to mask his own apprehension. "Don't be afraid, my son. Where there is darkness, there is often hidden light, and the air here is so pure, isn't it?" Lior nodded slowly, somewhat convinced by the firmness in his grandfather's voice, but his eyes still reflected the shadow of fear. With a sigh of courage that seemed to tear his exhausted chest, Kale took the first step into the cave. The sunlight quickly diminished, swallowed by the gloom that deepened with each meter. The distant murmuring sound grew clearer, a soft whisper of running water, and the mineral scent, fresh and clean, filled his lungs, unlike the stagnant dampness of the swamp or the heavy air of the forest. Cale felt a pang of hope, a thin thread pulling him forward. If the valley was one of healing waters, perhaps the cave was its prelude, the portal that would lead them to salvation. He fumbled along the rocky walls with his free hand, feeling the damp coldness of the stone and the roughness of ancient mosses. The floor was uneven, but not treacherous, and the cave seemed to widen as they advanced, like a stone womb. Lior walked glued to Kyle, his small steps echoing in the silence the cave imposed. The old man could feel his grandson's heart beating fast against his leg, but Lior didn't complain. His trust in his grandfather was a beacon in the oppressive darkness. Kyle tried to focus on the sound of the water, imagining the source that produced it, an image of clarity amidst the gloom. Finn's cough, which had calmed somewhat on the plateau, returned, a drawn-out, painful sound that broke the cave's silence, tightening Kyle's heart. He stopped, nestling his grandson closer, and whispered words of comfort in his ear. "We're almost there, my little one. We're almost there." With each step, the cave seemed to deepen, and the darkness became almost total, except for a faint greenish luminescence that seemed to come from mosses on the walls, offering minimal and ghostly visibility. Suddenly the floor began to slope gently downwards, and the murmuring of the water transformed into a stronger sound, a constant bubbling, almost a call. Kyle felt a surge of adrenaline course through his tired body. They were close. He quickened his pace, his exhausted body propelled by the urgency and the promise of that sound. Lior, noticing the change in his grandfather's rhythm, also hastened his steps, his childlike eyes fixed on the gloom ahead. In a few moments, the cave opened into a larger chamber, and the sight that revealed itself made Kyle catch his breath, a lump in his throat. In the center of the chamber, a natural pool of crystal-clear water glowed with a soft, bluish light, emanating from a crevice in the ceiling, through which a beam of moonlight or starlight penetrated, illuminating the water in a magical and ethereal way. The water was so clear that Kyle could see the rocky bottom, and small bubbles rose to the surface, as if the rock itself were alive, breathing. The air in the chamber was even purer, almost fragrant, and the sound of the water was a soft, constant song, a melody of hope. Kyle knelt by the edge of the pool, his eyes welling up, his vision blurred by tears of relief. This was not just water, it was the promise, the manifestation of the legend. He dipped his trembling hands into the water, feeling the invigorating coolness that seemed to purify everything it touched. Lior let out a small cry of admiration, his eyes fixed on the luminous pool, a glow of wonder on his face. Kyle, carefully, brought Finn to the edge, and cupping his hands, scooped up the water and offered it to his grandson's lips. Finn drank with an eagerness Kyle hadn't seen in days, a groan of relief escaping his dry lips. The old man felt the heat of the fever diminish slightly under his fingers, an unmistakable sign. Tears of gratitude streamed freely down Kyle's wrinkled face. He moistened Finn's forehead with the water, feeling the vital energy of that place penetrate the boy's skin. Lior, without hesitation, also drank from the pool, and a genuine smile, long absent, lit up his dirty face. That place was a sanctuary, a refuge, the first true hint that the legendary valley was within reach. Kyle looked at the crevice in the ceiling from where the light came. It wasn't just a crevice, it was an opening to the night sky, and through it he could see stars shining like diamonds. The cave was not a dead end, but a portal. Hope, once a fragile flame, now burned with full force in his chest. He knew the journey was not yet over, but healing was within reach. And the valley, finally, seemed real. Hope, once a fragile flame, now burned with full force in Kyle's chest. He knew the journey was not over, but healing was within reach, and the valley seemed real. He raised his eyes to the crevice in the cave ceiling where starlight bathed the pool. It was an opening, a path to what awaited beyond. With determination he stood, holding Finn. "Lyre, my son, we need to climb," he said, pointing. Lior, with revitalized energy, nodded. The climb was arduous, but the narrow walls offered handholds, and the starlight guided them. Kyle used every fiber of his tired body, propelled by the sight of Finn, who seemed to breathe more easily. Lior, agile, climbed right behind, offering pushes and encouragement. "We're almost there, father. I see more stars." When Kale hoisted himself out of the crevice, pulling Lior and Finn with him, he felt the night air, fresh and pure, kiss his face. They were on a small plateau, different from the previous ones. There was soft grass and the scent of wild flowers. Kale looked around and his heart leaped. Before them stretched a sight that defied all misery and despair. It was not just a valley, it was a paradise. The light of the full moon bathed the landscape, revealing a vast and lush valley, dotted with fruit trees and shimmering streams that meandered through fields of flowers. The surrounding mountains formed a protective wall, and the air was warm, gentle. Kyle felt tears stream down his wrinkled face, not from sadness, but from a relief so profound it seemed to tear the pain from his soul. He had promised, and now, there it was. The legendary valley, real, tangible, more beautiful than any fairy tale. Lior let out a cry of joy, running ahead, his arms open to embrace that beauty. "Father, look, it's the valley, it's the valley!" His childlike voice echoed in the night stillness, full of pure wonder. Kyle, with Finn still asleep in his arms, knelt on the soft grass. He looked at his grandson, and what he saw made his heart overflow. Finn's forehead, once feverish and damp, was now cool and dry. The paleness of his face had diminished, and a soft color began to return to his cheeks. The boy's breathing was regular, deep, without the slightest sign of the cough that had tormented him. As Kyle watched, Finn's eyes slowly opened. There was no confusion or pain, only serene calm. He looked at his grandfather, then at Lior, who approached with a radiant smile. A small smile, faint but unmistakable, appeared on Finn's lips. It was a smile of peace, of relief. Kyle felt a lump in his throat, emotions overwhelming him. He had kept his promise. Love, perseverance, faith, it had all been worth it. The valley was not just healing for Finn, but a sanctuary for their exhausted souls, a new beginning. That moment, under the moonlight, with his grandson safe and Finn beginning to recover, was the climax of their journey, proof that hope never dies. Kyle embraced the two boys, feeling life pulse again in his family. Kyle embraced the two boys, feeling life pulse again in his family. That embrace, under the starry mantle of the valley, was more than a gesture. It was the celebration of a victory won with every fiber of his being. He felt Finn's body, once so fragile, now firmer and warmer, with the natural warmth of life, not fever. Lior, nestled between them, radiated contagious joy, his small arms squeezing his grandfather with unexpected strength. As the sun began to peek from behind the mountains, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, Finn awoke completely. His eyes, once blurred by illness, were now clear and bright, fixed on Kyle's face. He didn't cough, he didn't moan, he just looked, a small smile forming on his lips. Kyle felt his heart swell with overwhelming gratitude. He had kept his promise. "Father, he's well," Lior exclaimed, his voice a whisper of pure wonder. He touched Finn's hand, who to everyone's surprise squeezed his back. It was a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes about the boy's recovery. Kyle helped Finn sit up, and the little one supported himself, looking around with a childlike curiosity he hadn't shown in a long time. The paleness of his face had vanished, replaced by a soft, healthy color. He seemed to have recovered not only his health, but also a part of his essence, of his spirit. With the dawn, The valley revealed itself in all its glory. The air was sweet, laden with the scent of wild flowers and the freshness of running water. Kyle guided the boys along a gentle trail that meandered among trees laden with ripe fruits and bushes of colorful berries. Hunger, a constant companion for so long, began to be dispelled by the abundance that surrounded them. Lior eagerly picked fruits, offering them to Finn, who accepted them with a ravenous appetite. Kyle watched. Each bite his grandson took was a balm to his soul. They found a perfect spot to settle, a small clearing by a crystal-clear stream, sheltered by a large tree with branches that extended like welcoming arms. The grass was soft, and the sound of the water was a constant melody of peace. Kyle felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced since being driven from his village. This place, this valley, was more than a refuge, it was a home. In the days that followed, life in the valley unfolded with a simplicity and beauty Kyle had never imagined. Finn quickly regained his strength, running and laughing with Lior, exploring every corner of that paradise. The cough and fever were just distant memories, replaced by vibrant energy and contagious joy. Kyle spent his days building a more robust shelter with the materials the forest offered, teaching Lior to fish in the stream and identify edible plants. He felt renewed, not just physically, but in spirit. At night, sitting by the campfire under a star-studded sky, Kyle told stories about their journey, about the tower, the map, and the unwavering faith that guided them. Lior listened with wide eyes, and Finn, nestled in his lap, smiled, a living testament to resilience and love. Kyle looked at his grandsons, at the valley that had welcomed them, and knew that true wealth was not in gold or possessions, but in the unbreakable connection of his family and the ability to overcome adversity with hope and courage. They had found not just a place, but a purpose, a new life where perseverance and love were the pillars of their existence. The valley had become the sanctuary they had sought, and there, under the moonlight, Kyle's family finally found their peace. The valley had become the sanctuary they had sought, and there, under the moonlight, Kyle's family finally found their peace. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, weaving a tapestry of serenity and contentment. Kyle watched his grandsons grow, not just in stature, but in spirit, like the young trees sprouting from the valley's fertile soil. Finn, once a pale spectre of illness, now ran through the fields with the inexhaustible energy of a healthy child, his crystalline laughter echoing among the mountains. Lior, in turn, had blossomed into a more mature boy, his curious eyes absorbing every teaching from his grandfather about the plants, animals, and secrets of the valley. He helped Kyle with the small garden they cultivated and in building a more solid house made of wood and stone, a true home built with their own hands and the love of a family. At night, around the gently crackling campfire, Kyle sat with the boys, the warmth of the flames reflected on their faces. He told stories, not just the ancient legends he had heard in his youth, but also his own saga, the expulsion from the village, the desolate tower, the mysterious map, and the arduous journey to that hidden paradise. Lior and Finn listened with reverent attention, their gazes fixed on their grandfather, understanding in their childlike way the depth of the sacrifice and faith that had brought them there. Finn often nestled in Kyle's lap, his small body now robust and full of life, a silent testament to victory over adversity. Kyle, with a peaceful heart, often found himself watching the valley at dawn, the mist dissipating to reveal the untouched beauty of the landscape. He thought of the village that had rejected them, of the faces that had scorned him. There was no bitterness in his heart, only a deep understanding. True wealth was not in material possessions or social acceptance, but in the resilience of the human spirit, the strength of family love, and the ability to find light even in the deepest darkness. The valley had not given them gold, but something far more valuable, a second chance, a renewed purpose, and proof that hope, when fueled by perseverance, can move mountains. The connection between Cale and his grandsons had deepened in a way he had never imagined. Every smile from Finn, every curious question from Lior was a constant reminder of the miracle they had lived. They were more than a family. They were survivors, woven together by shared experiences and the unwavering love that bound them. Kyle, though his hair was whiter and his wrinkles deeper, felt younger in spirit than he had in many years. The exhaustion that had consumed him had been replaced by a serene energy, the energy of one who had found his place in the world. One day, as Lior and Finn played near the stream, their laughter echoing like silver bells, Kyle sat on the porch of his new home, watching them. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the warm sun on his face and the sweet scent of the flowers. The journey had been long and painful, but every step, every tear, every prayer had been an investment in his grandson's future. He had promised to save them, and he had. More than that, he had given them a legacy of courage, faith, and the understanding that true love is the greatest force in the universe. The valley was their new kingdom, and his family, his most precious treasure. There, they were not just inhabitants, but guardians of a story of triumph, a beacon of hope for anyone who dared to dream. The peace that enveloped them was the final melody of a symphony of life, an eternal testament that with love and perseverance, any ruin can transform into a home, and any despair into a promise of a radiant tomorrow full of hope. The peace that enveloped them was the final melody of a symphony of life, an eternal testament that, with love and perseverance, any ruin can transform into a home, and any despair into a promise of a radiant tomorrow full of hope. Years wove themselves over the valley, transforming Cale's clearing into a thriving settlement. Other families, drawn by rumors of fertile lands and healing waters, had found their way to that paradise. Kyle's house, once a simple shelter, was now the heart of the community, a beacon of wisdom and welcome. Finn and Lior, now strong youths full of vitality, were living proof of the valley's miracle. Finn, with his blue eyes reflecting the serenity of the stream, had become a skilled healer, learning from Cale the properties of herbs and waters. His laughter, once a fragile sound, was now a robust echo of life and gratitude. Lior, with the same spark of curiosity that had propelled him on the journey, had become a leader, organizing the harvest, building bridges and ensuring the community's harmony. He was the strong arm, the builder of the future, always with an affectionate gaze for his grandfather. Kyle, his hair even whiter and his wrinkles deeper, often sat on his porch, watching the valley flourish. His eyes, once exhausted and desperate, now shone with deep peace and serene contentment. He saw the reflection of his journey in every child's smile, in every abundant harvest, in every act of kindness that united the inhabitants. The memory of the village that had driven him out no longer brought pain. Only the lesson that a man's worth is not measured by his position, but by resilience and love. One day, as the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Finn and Lior approached Kyle. Finn, with a basket of freshly gathered herbs, sat at his grandfather's feet, while Lior, his hands calloused from work, rested his head on his shoulder. Kyle felt the weight and warmth of his grandsons, the life he had fought so hard to preserve, now vibrant and present. He stroked Finn's hair, then Lior's, a gesture of love that transcended words. "Father," Lior said, his voice now deep and full of respect, "the valley is prospering. People see us as their guides, their protectors." Kyle smiled, a smile that lit up his wrinkled face. "It is not I who guides them, my son. It is hope. It is the love we planted here with every difficult step, every prayer. You are my legacy, proof that faith moves mountains and that true wealth resides in family and human connection." Finn looked up at Cale, a glimmer of understanding in his gaze. "And the tower, father? That dark, cold place. That's where it all began, wasn't it?" Kyle nodded, his voice soft, full of memories. "Yes, my little one. The tower was the end of one path, but the beginning of another. It taught us that even in ruins, one can find a map to a new beginning, to a valley of hope." He looked at the horizon where stars began to dot the sky. Each of us carries our own tower, our own challenges, but it is how we face them, with courage and an open heart, that defines who we are. In that moment, under the vast, starry sky of the valley, Kyle felt a fullness he had never imagined possible. His grandsons, the community they had built, the peace that enveloped them, all was a testament to the unwavering strength of the human spirit. Life in the valley was not without challenges, but they faced them together as a family, united by a story of triumph and a radiant future. Cale closed his eyes, feeling the gentle wind and the love of his grandsons. He had found his purpose, his home, and the certainty that life's greatest adventure is the journey of the heart, guided by hope and unconditional love. And so, Cale's Valley continued to flourish, an eternal reminder that perseverance and love are the true treasures, capable of transforming desolation into paradise and despair into an infinite promise of a radiant tomorrow.